Pioneers, don't move. Everyone on stage, your pioneers.
We're going to do these photos, and we'd like to see all the African American designers in the audience up here, or all those who'd like to participate. You want to think about it this like, I think this I'd like to welcome you all to this final part of the program, which we're calling A Conversation with the Pioneers. All of these gentlemen sitting here were really not absolutely the first generation, but they came into the field when it was difficult, if not impossible, for African Americans to work in the design field. I think every person on this stage faced obstacles that maybe a lot of young people might not face today. They had to struggle through a lot of difficulties, and every one of them triumphed in an absolutely magnificent way. First, I'd like to tell you about Vince Cullors, who's sitting on my left. In 1956, he founded Vince Cullors Advertising, the first black-owned full-service advertising agency in the United States. The agency pioneered in targeted marketing to the black consumer. In the late 1960s, it gained prominence with its innovative ads for Ken cigarettes and Afro Sheen. Past and current clients include Sears Roebuck, Lorillard, Amoco, Pizza Hut, Coors Brewing Company, the U.S. Treasury Department, and the Chicago White Sox. Charles Harrison, who's sitting next to Vince, is a graduate of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and the Institute of Design. He is currently adjunct professor of industrial design at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and was formerly a senior industrial designer and department manager at Sears Roebuck and Company, where he worked for more than 32 years. At Sears, Chuck was responsible for hundreds of products, including sewing machines, televisions, furniture, and lawnmowers. He is also known for his design of the Viewmaster, one of the icons of 20th century Americana. I'd like to mention now Andre Richardson King, who's sitting next to Chuck Harrison, who's a graduate of the University of Chicago and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He began his career at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, where he was involved in establishing the firm's signage division. In 1981, he founded Andre Richardson King Designers, Inc., which specializes in environmental graphic design. Clients of Andre's firm have included the Museum of Science and Industry, Midway Airport, Miglin Beitler Developers, Tishman Speyer Properties, O'Hare International Airport, and the North Loop Redevelopment Project. Gene Winslow was a graduate of the Institute of Design in Chicago. He worked for a number of design firms here. He had his own firm at several different occasions, and he then became a vice president and one of the founders of Afro-Am Publishing Company, where he spent a number of years producing extraordinary visual materials. He worked also for the Supreme Life Insurance Company doing calendars and for a number of other clients. Next to Gene is Tom Miller, graduate of Virginia State University and the Ray Vogue School of Art. He spent more than 33 years as a graphic designer with Morton Goldschall Associates, one of Chicago's leading design firms, which he joined in 1954. The firm specialized in print design, corporate identity, packaging, and animated commercials. Clients with which Tom was associated include the 7-Up Company, Borg Warner, Arthur Anderson and Company, Brunswick Corporation, Carrollton Envelope, Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company, and Scott Forsman. Tom is also a distinguished artist, and his mosaic murals grace the foyer of this museum. Herbert Temple, sitting to the left of Tom Miller, attended the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He's currently Senior Art Director at the Johnson Publishing Company, where he has been involved for somewhat over 35 to 40 years in all of the company's magazines, Negro Digest, Negro World, Ebony, Ebony Junior, and Jet, as well as with the book publishing division, where he designed the Ebony Cookbook, Negro Firsts in Sports, and Legends of Africania. Herb has also designed the corporate symbol for Johnson Publishing, as well as logos for its cosmetics company Fashion Fair, and he has done more than 100 illustrations for the company's various publications. LEROY WINBUSH went to work as an apprentice sign painter when he finished high school in 1936. He moved on to do display signs for the Regal Theater, and then became the director of window display design for all the Goldblatt's department stores in the 1940s. In 1946, he founded WINBUSH Associates, a full-service design agency that eventually included the window displays for most of the banks on LaSalle Street among its projects. After 7 attempts, LEROY was admitted to the Chicago Art Directors Club, whose president he eventually became. His clients in recent years have included NBC, O'Hare International Airport, Neocon, Central City Productions, and the Bally Corporation. I'd like to ask some general questions and then some specific questions, and I would say whoever feels free to respond, please do so. Following on what some of the younger designers mentioned about how they began with the love of drawing and so forth, I'd like to ask any of you who want to start off to talk about how you first became interested in art and how that interest led you to think about something called design.
As a young child growing up, I was interested in magazines and newspapers that my mother was bringing home from one of the executives that worked at one of the advertising agencies downtown. And he would, my mother told him I was interested in art, and he would give her Collier's, Saturday Evening Post, all of the magazines. We couldn't afford them at that time. And she would bring them home. And I would begin looking through the magazines and became enthused with the illustrations. And I would say I'd try to duplicate some of the illustrations, and before long I knew just about all of the illustrators and their styles, and I guess I got interested in trying to be an illustrator, and eventually that's what I wanted to do. Growing up as a young man in Evanston, that's where I grew up, the blacks didn't have any outlets at all. We all hung out at the YMCA, and they didn't have any classes there for us that pertained to drawing and things of that nature. And when we moved to Chicago, I became interested in the Southside Community Arts Center. And that's where I met a lot of these guys that are on stage now. And there, I met a guy by the name of LEROY WINBUSH. With Bill McBride, and these two men were instrumental in me, I think, developing my talent. And I remember Bill McBride had a collection of E. Sims Campbell's drawings. He was a black cartoonist for Esquire magazine. And that really floored me. I didn't think that any blacks were involved in anything of that nature at that time.
Neither did anybody else.
And so I tried to adapt his style to my work. He was a terrific watercolorist. And if any of you remember, there might be some older people here in the audience, that he was very famous for his harem scenes with beautiful ladies and the big fat harem guy. And so I don't know, I just developed a penchant for wanting to be an illustrator. And I pursued that throughout my career.
Somebody else like to comment?
Time. I'm going to go back to about 1935 or 36. All right. Leroy was still a young man. People of color were not in the arts. They were in medicine, education, law, and something that was called respectable. And we were told we do not participate in the arts, we support it. Well, I had an aunt that dated Jackson Pollock. She knew Sanford White, and she also knew Margaret Burroughs. And I met Margaret. She was the first woman that did not have her hair fixed and wore sandals. Okay? And she was a big impact. Now, whether one wanted to be in the arts is another story, because one did not do that because you didn't make money out of it. And I guess the impression was these people were different. People at that point were doing art for art's sake. And if you wanted to participate, you sort of looked at it as something that was going to happen, that was pleasurable. It wasn't economic, certainly, because you couldn't make money at it. Right? I won't continue with this. You used to ask a question, so I'll shut up.
Actually, Vince, when I interviewed him, he talked about drawing pictures of Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, that was one way I got through high school. I didn't have to go to class because my teachers had me drawing Abraham Lincoln all the time from various programs. And then I found out that Abraham Lincoln was not quite the hero that we thought he was in terms of why we, as a people in America, are not in slavery. It was really an economic situation that brought that about. But we won't go into that because that's a little deep, I think, for this. Let me just say our involvement in the art business started as a fine artist when I was younger, and that ran out of steam because I couldn't make any money at that. And I decided to be a commercial artist, and I got into the advertising industry. And I'd say that make a long story short, because we don't have too much time. We got all these long-winded guys up here who haven't had a chance. But when I got into the advertising industry, I tried to get in. There were no blacks in it. And there were no opportunities for blacks to get in the industry because that's just the way it was in those days. So that's how we started. We had one purpose in mind, and that it was we were going to open that door.
Well, maybe to follow along with the opening the door, I could ask Tom Miller to talk about what it was like when he was at the Ray Vogue School and the expectations he had that weren't met, and then how he made his way to get to his to Goldshaw.
There was a time in my life when, as Vince just said, there weren't too many blacks involved. And I think I was about the only black person in the school at the time. Then another gentleman came in. But I was promised a job I came out of World War II, from overseas, out of World War II, and went in the school under the GI Bill, and I was promised a job the minute I came out, of which I didn't get. So I was one of the few people who graduated from that school who didn't get a job, and that was mainly because I was black. But that didn't stop me, obviously, and eventually, I'll cut this short. I got a job with Mort Goldshaw, and I stayed with him 33 or 35 years, and retired from there. So that's in a capsule about what it was. It wasn't as explicit as I could be, but I don't think I have that much time.
Leroy, maybe you'd like to say something about how you got started, because you came up through a different route.
I think that I have to make this statement before I talk about myself, that we have an obligation to the next generation to get them involved in the design field. What we are beginning here is just the beginning. And I would like to see us get together all of the various organizations that are doing the same thing to really make an impact. Because if you think about it a little bit, look at how many people are here, but compare this to the whole state of Illinois. This is just 1/10 of 1%. We are just still in the beginning, even with what we have here. It's still the beginning. So I would like to see us really work this thing out so that we make an impact. Now, to talk about myself, we don't have 3 hours for me to sit up here and talk.
No. We have a couple of minutes, Leroy.
I have to forget about that. I have to hop, skip, and jump. So what I will do is tell you in the beginning, when I worked at the original Regal Theater, my shop was under the stage of the theater, which was an exhilarating kind of an experience. I met every famous entertainer that you can think about. The Nat King Cole Trio, Billy Eckstein, Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Ella Fitzgerald. And I got to tell this little funny story. I was sitting on the stage, backstage, looking at the stage show. And Ella Fitzgerald came over with the flowing dress, and she said, "May I sit in your lap because I don't want to get my dress wrinkled." Now, how could I refuse? So here, she's sitting in my lap, and the band is playing, and she's singing right in my ear. What an experience. And I could go on and on and on, but however, that was one of the highlights in my career. And as I said before, I've had many other experiences like that or similar. And when I worked at Gold Blast, that was another thing altogether. It was unheard of at that time. I'm talking about, I have a picture of myself at my desk, and I looked at it real close, and the calendar over my head says 1942. That was the date that's on the calendar. So I had the opportunity to do a lot of things that we are attempting to do right here. And I have had what I would consider a very colorful career, and I'm still in it. I'm still operating and still learning and still making progress in this field. But I want to see us get a real force together and do what I said, make an impact.
Well, we'll try, Leroy. Gene Winslow went to the Institute of Design, which just before he went and when he went, it was one of the most exciting schools in the country in terms of new ideas, in terms of form and so forth. And Gene did some really amazing work there and had some amazing experiences. I wonder if you'd like to say a word or two about that.
Although I lived in Chicago and was also like neighbors of the Institute of Design, I actually heard of it when I went to visit my brother in Mexico, who was an artist, painter. And his friends said, "You live in Chicago and you don't know about the Institute of Design?" So when I returned to Mexico, I contacted the Institute of Design, and my concept of art broadened from that point on. I never thought of art again as painting pictures or a canvas or anything like that. I saw design and the avenues for design in every aspect of our life. And that's pretty much the way I've followed my art and design talents. I've been a cartoonist, I've been an artist, an illustrator, I've painted pictures, I've done mechanical design, mechanical illustration for an inventor named Stokes, who somebody, some of you may know. But I owe my whole awakening to the concept of art to the Bauhaus, which was started over in Germany by Gregor Kepish and Maholy Nagy. And they gave to my small concept of art a breadth and depth which I have not been able to plumb to its extent even to this day.
Just to get a comparison, I'll ask Chuck Harrison to talk about his time at the School of the Art Institute and the mentors you found there.
Well, I got into the Art Institute sort of by default, but I was happy to get there. I first of all didn't get into art in this whole area like most of the other people here who got in very young and with someone in the family who kind of was able to coach them along. I got in under desperation. I was in college, in my first year of college at 16 years old. Shouldn't have been there, but I was. And I was flunking out. I had an economics major, and I had been put on probation. And my next thing was to be sent back home, but I tried art, and it worked. So I stayed. And my career, shortly afterwards, became an honor student and made my way from there. But I did get to Chicago to study industrial design. At the time, there were only 5 schools in the United States that even offered curriculums that had a curriculum that had a credibility. It was Pratt Institute, Rhode Island School of Design, Carnegie Tech, School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and the University of Illinois at Champaign. And Champaign was the only state university in the United States that offered a curriculum in industrial design at that time. Well, I applied to all 5. It was a long waiting list because of all the veterans at the World War II to get into college. And I was accepted at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and got right in. So that brought me to Chicago, and that's how I got it. Just another little note that I learned later was the reason why I got accepted at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago was that the school had a quota system where they only accepted 5 blacks each year for admission to the school, and they only had 4 when I applied. So, is that enough? Oh, okay. Well, my training at the Art Institute was very rich and very rewarding. And while I did go on later to the Institute of Design, the same school where Mr. Winslow was. I think most of my fundamental training I picked up at the School of the Art Institute was a little more practically oriented, I suppose, to a pipeline to employment than ID was. And I benefited greatly from both schools, but I think I got more practical fundamentals at the Art Institute because most of the instructors there were practicing designers who had studios or businesses, independent businesses, who only taught at the Art Institute part-time. At IIT, those were very rich philosophers and people who were very much involved in the education process and that scope of design that developed under the philosophy of the Bauhaus. They both were rewarding.
Business. I had a couple of friends of mine that I went to, and we talked about forming an organization. And one of them sitting there in the middle here, Mr. Gene Winslow. And we had an organization called Colors, Jones, and Winslow. And our office was in a garage station. Now, that's a very small place. We had to turn around and pass by each other every day. But the whole concept was that we had a great thought of getting in the ad business because we knew that's where the money was. But we couldn't get any clients that could pay us. So I think our business kind of went by default because we couldn't keep it together. But I think I worked under LEROY WINBUSH over there at Ebony Magazine for 2 minutes, I think. I enjoyed working with LEROY and worked with her. I don't know, my career has been one that has kind of went the gamut. Being inspired by the LEROYs of the world and the Herbs and the guys who are doing things. Johnny Johnson at Ebony Magazine certainly was an influence on me. But my whole thing has been to try to introduce the talents of African Americans, our blacks, as my friend would rather be called. I'm not going to talk about the conversations I've had. Get them involved in the business. And as a pioneer, so to speak, that's still an opportunity and it's still not a fulfilled goal. So I would like young people, as I think LEROY has said, to take a look at the advertising and marketing and design field and try to be good at it, but try to get in it.
Of course, I was told that I would go to a university, I would be a doctor, I would be a lawyer, or something that was presentable and worthy and follow in some footsteps. So I'll run a very quick gamut which might explain a lot about that and leads to Skid more quickly. My father flew his own plane, 1934. I saw the coming of the war, 1939. Had an aunt that came back and said Hitler is ruining everything in Europe. She came back on the Aquitanian line. Well, these are all impressions that you're beginning to get about life and how you fit into it and people. Now I'm going to say this for what it's worth because it also leads up to SOM. The creative process does not have a racial face. It comes from inside of individuals, regardless of who you happen to be, where you're from, what strata of society, and on and on and on. You're the one that has to recognize that if it becomes a green light in your life. So when I was told that I was going to go, this was after the military, I left that out. The Air Force had a lot to do with it. 4 years of that, seeing what happened in Europe and on and on and on, people living in basements, seeing the lights turned on in Europe for the first time, all affects one's psyche. Came home, took a job at the post office throwing mail. My father almost had a fit. Right? He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't know, I have a job." He said, "Go back to Europe until you make up your mind what you want to do with your life." So I did. Europe, Africa, a few other things, bad enough, Congo, a few things like that. Coming back to the United States, I still had no concept other than I was going back to school, and I got a summer job working at Skidmore, Owings in Maryland because I knew Air Force procedures and a few things like that. and met chaps like Walter Netsch. Oh, I left out, at one point in this ongoing thing, I applied for a job at a studio, and there's a guy by the name of LEROY WINBUSH there that I was 15 years old, and I had met through a partner of his, a very sophisticated man named Mintrell Parker. Now, Mintrell absolutely, I don't think, knew anything about art or graphics. I can't say that because he just seemed to be like a rolling stone. But LEROY was working over a plywood table, and I walked into this dirty, dusty place over on Canal Street. And it was hotter than hell in there, too. And I said, I want to work here? Well, he didn't give me the job. He looked at me, maybe I was dressed wrong or my attitude or something. So I didn't see him again until I met my wife, right, on South America. We were on a ship of fools, and she was a guest, and I was a guest, and he was one of the perpetrators of the whole thing. And we were all nuts. In any event, getting back to Skidmore very quickly, Skidmore was, at that time, growing to be the largest architectural firm in the world. They didn't know it yet, but they were on their way. And I had an opportunity to work with Walter Netsch, who introduced me to Frank Lloyd Wright, who was still living at that time. So, getting on with that, we began to develop criteria for the future with architecture. Things like graphics, which we had print people in advertising to do that. I mean, you just didn't put a placard on a building because it destroyed the architecture. We would hope that the sky hooks, it would hold itself up, that we didn't have to worry about that because we were doing buildings. Signing became an add-on part of the architecture and the interiors. You learn to love materials. And I'm going to end with, it was the best, I won't end with it, but I'll add this. Skidmore was the catalyst for me to start a life with independence and without the support of my family. My grandfather cut off all of my money. He said, you want to do that? Fine, you do it yourself. And I got a job the first time on Torrance Avenue in the Ford rolling plant, right, of which my hands never recovered from. But it proved a point. You can do it, right, if you want to. And Skidmore happened to be a good catalyst. There's a lot of hard bricks in there, a lot of glass ceilings. I mean, and there was an Indian chap by the name of Faz Khan. I'm saying this, and I'm going on for a reason because of our conversation a little while ago. We may be black people, we may be Indian people, but we are an American group. The Japanese are Japanese, the British are British, the Germans are Germans, the French are French, the Italians are Italians. We're the only people that splinter ourselves up instead of being a people. Creative people, thinking people, a society, and we have to teach our children that. So ultimately, that's what Skidmore gave me. Thank you. I mean, I had to get that off my chest because we were talking about that. Excuse me.
I'd like to actually ask Herb Temple and then LEROY to talk a little bit about the early days at Johnson Publishing.
I think what we have to take into consideration is that we came up in an era that everything was segregated. And living in the black community, as we did at that time, you had no contact with the white world at all. I remember walking down Michigan Avenue, and you very seldom saw any blacks on Michigan Avenue. All the blacks were on Wabash and State. And in the black community, the buses were segregated, the streetcars were segregated, the cabs were segregated. All the stores were owned by white folks. And you might find a little barbecue place over here, a barbershop, or a hair salon for women in the black neighborhoods that were owned by blacks. But everything was controlled by whites. So that affected you psychologically. You didn't go downtown because everything was on the south side. even your movies.
That's not the only reason you didn't go downtown.
Pardon?
That was not the only reason you didn't go downtown. You weren't necessarily wanted downtown.
Well, you wasn't wanted downtown, that's true. And so you can see what kind of environment we were growing up in at that time. And it was quite an experience for me. I really didn't understand the difference until I went into the service. And in the Army, your officers were white. And it wasn't until I returned from Australia that I think it was Truman that passed the law that integrated the services. And, but you still were saddled with this feeling of not being a part of everything that was happening. And so when I came back from the service, I was just a soldier, young black boy, emotionally still a child. And so I remember telling my mother that I've got to have a job. I'm back now from the service. So bless her heart, she saw one of the religious leaders that where she attended at his church, and asked him would he give me a job out at the stockyards. And so he said, yes, send him out. So I went out to stockyards and went into this room, and they said, well, what we want you to do is put on 2 suits of underwear. And then they put me on some kind of a coat or jacket and said, your job is to push those half cows over on the other side there and clean the blood out of them. And I said, okay, hey, this is a job. So I proceeded to do this. And after a week, man, my muscles were so sore, I couldn't lift my arms up. So I told my mother, I said, hey, that's not for me. I'm going back to school. So she said, well, it's up to you. Do whatever you want to do. So I went down to the VA and applied. And they said, well, in 3 weeks, Mr. Temple, we'll let you know if you're qualified to go back to school. So finally, I got my transcript to go back to school. And I went down to the Art Institute. And here was a new environment entirely for me. The kids that I was in class with were talking about Machiavelli and the discourses, and discussing Will Durant and his pleasures. I said, what the hell is all this, you know? And so I was introduced to all of these new things and concepts, and it changed my life completely. All the dudes that I was hanging with on the south side, I forgot about them and started hanging out with the students. And it just changed my whole life. And after I spent, 4 years in day school and 3 years in night school, and we were sitting in class one day, and so I noticed that the teacher was calling all of the white students up and speaking in very low. I said, what the hell's going on, you know? I said, he hasn't called me up there. I said, I'm supposed to be one of the best students. So at lunchtime, I contacted a friend of mine, and I asked him, Noel Daggett, who's a white guy, and I said, Noel, I want to see you a minute, come in the bathroom. And he came in the bathroom. And I said, what's going on here? Why is he calling all those people up there? He says, he's giving us jobs. And I said, what? Giving you jobs? So I didn't confront him with this, and I went and saw the assistant dean, Mrs. Hamill. And I explained the situation to her, and she said, Herb, that's one of the things that we have no control over. The teachers are professionals, and it's up to them to select who they want to go out on these particular jobs. She said, but I'll tell you one thing. I'll give you a listing of all the agencies that are up and down Michigan Avenue, and I'd like for you to go to some of these agencies and see if you can get hired. Well, naturally, my work was, as they say in the game, you're just a little too qualified, and we can't use you, you know. So I got this from about, I guess I went to about 7 or 8 agencies, and I didn't get hired. And I went back to Mrs. Hamill, and she said, well, Herb, I have another place I'd like to send you, and it's at the Food and Container Institute. That's a division of the quartermaster. And I said, okay, I'll go. So I went out there, this guy, I'll never forget his name, Mr. Hamlin, and he said, well, I like your work here, but I don't know if we can hire you. I'll have to talk over with some other guys. I'll give you a call. So what he did, the teacher had sent 2 of the students that I was in class with to the quartermaster. And so Hamill went in and asked these white guys that I was in school with, look, there's a black guy that applied for a job here, and his work is pretty good, and I'd like to know if you guys want to work with him. And they say, well, who is he? He said, Herb Temple. He says, my God, yes, we were in class with him. Sure, he's all right. So I got a call, and that's how I got hired.
Eugene made a very interesting move in his career. He started working for white firms, and then at a certain point, you turned into the black community, and you began to develop sort of a new phase of your career with Supreme Life calendars. And I remember when I talked to you, you said that the Afro-Am was just an incredible experience. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what it was like why you went that particular route and what satisfaction it had for you to do these incredible portraits and so forth.
Yeah, there was nowhere to go for young black artists, whether it was commercial or fine, and I could find no openings in either area. And so I set out to sort of create an area. One of the lacks, as L-A-C-K, I saw in the black community was in the educational field. And so I started a series of black portraits of well-known blacks in the past, and I sold them to the school systems. So at present there are at least 25 portfolios of blacks famous in 10 different areas. And I made those and sold them as part of my art career. some of these pictures can be seen in the schools today. They're about 11 by 14, and they're two-color. And down in the lower right-hand corner is my name. And to this day, the Afro-Am is one of the few firms that created materials on blacks, for blacks, by blacks. And soon our portfolios, which some of you may still see, were still sold almost every school system in the United States. On the basis of that, I branched out as a freelance designer, advertising art. And in that capacity, I connected up with Colors and a fellow by the name of Jones. And we got our experience in advertising art with a little an outfit called Colors, Jones, and Winslow, which lasted about as quick as we could say the name. But it did give us an experience in the advertising field, and as a matter of fact, of advertising per se. And I think that probably Colors got the best education from that experience. But that's about this. And then I start freelancing and servicing black enterprises, barbershops, so forth, making their little cards and so forth, calling cards. And for a while I made a little living of doing that. As a matter of fact, up until recently, it was one of the ways I was making my living until I wrote and illustrated a book, 2 books on black history. One's called Great Negroes, Past and Present, which we got accepted into most of the school systems throughout the country. And to this day, it's known as one of the best books on black history going. I wrote another one, the second one, which is not as popular as the first one, partly because it was the second one. But it did cover personalities and events and so forth that the first one did not. And it's still being sold. And after I began to sort of make a living off of my freelance work, the book publishing, we started a company called Afro-Am and published books and 11 by 14 pictures of over 100 different personalities, which we sold to the schools. And that's why I made it up until just recently.
I'd like to go to Tom Miller and have Tom Miller talk a little bit about his experience at Goldschall. And you might want to say something about your work with 7-Up, which has come to some prominence, but just generally all the different things you did there, because you worked in so many areas.
I was given a lot of leeway at Goldschall, being the only black person on the board. And some of the things that went on was, for an example, the 7-Up thing, that was a result. I'll just give you an idea of how we designed and how we delved into the design aspect of the field, those bubbles, those 7-Up cartons and cans were bubbles, and that was the design of the 7-Up at that time. It was a takeoff from bubbles, but they were just made into dots. And the same thing was prevalent with, say, Motorola. I worked on Motorola back in the 50s, and it was made up of a lysogyl. A lysogyl being a part of an oscillogram, went up and down like this, just almost like an electrocardiogram going like that. And so what the firm did was they made the 2 points and then put 2 perfect ovals underneath. And that's what you have for your Motorola trademark right now. And I was just giving you a rough idea as to how some of the things were designed, like International Minerals and Chemicals. It's a big 3-leaf clover, and inside of the clover, well, I won't go into that one because that was quite a long ways to explain. But a lot of the things were I could go through. You know, there's been so many years ago, but I do know that we had to use every analytical part of design, and we used a lot of the Bauhaus.
If you work in a major corporation in America today, or at any point, there's so much going on there at all levels. And truthfully, I never really understood all the different rules at each level of the game. But in any case, it was very difficult for me to get in there in the first place. And in fact, the first time I approached Cicero to get employed, I was about 1956, just to give you a little time frame. And this is not identified Sears as any different from any other major corporation in America, but just to tell you what the climate was like at that point across the country. I went out because I had some classmates, people that I attended school with, who were working there. Now, I had been all over Chicago, looked under every rock in town trying to find a job, and I couldn't find nobody would hire me. I mean, the people would say, oh, they're hiring over so-and-so. I'd go over there and they say, oh, you know what, we just filled that job and we don't need anybody. So I was the answer to everybody's shortage problem. I'd just show up. They didn't need anybody anymore. You know, and, but I solved that employment problem. You know, but when I went out to see Roebuck, and my friend said, well, they have an opening out there. And just by coincidence or a real stroke of luck, the fellow who was managing the industrial design group at that point had a propensity or an empathy for people with difficulties. And he proceeded to try to hire me at Sears. And we started the employment process, and like it's true in bureaucracies of all large ones, there's a lot of unnecessary stuff you have to go through. And after about the second or third interview, this guy was very uncomfortable in his chair, and he said, you know, I have to tell you this, I'm embarrassed by it. He said, but I've just learned that Sears Roebuck has an unwritten policy against hiring blacks. Now, fortunately for him, there was no law in place at that time about unfair practices in hiring. I mean, that was just America. I mean, they could tell you that. In fact, they may tell you don't even come in the building, first place. But that was the state of life at that point. Well, so he did give me a freelance opportunity where I was able to work there for about a year or so, just as a freelance person, and I would do my work. Again, he'd give me an assignment, I'd do it, I'd bring it back out, deliver it to him, and I'd build a company for it, and they would pay me. Well, that went on for quite a while. And to try to cut through this and get it short, I got a job with a former instructor of mine, and went to work for him. He called, says, I'm expanding my operation. Would you consider coming to work for me? I said, I'll be there before you close. He said, no. He said, tomorrow soon enough. And so I got started with him. And quite luckily, from that point on, I really never had to look for another job. People would call and say, well, I saw your work. Someone said they interviewed you. Would you come over and talk to me? Or would you consider working? And so that's unbelievable, but it happened. In any case, about 5 years later, I got a call from Sears Roebuck again, saying, we can hire you now. Huh?
They changed their policy.
Yeah, they said, we can hire you now. By this time, I'm working in a firm on Michigan Avenue, right? Michigan and Wacker all come together, and I'm the straw boss there. I'm feeling pretty good. Got 2, 3 guys reporting to me, and I told them, I said, I don't need you now. I mean, I've got a good job. They said, well, why don't you come out and at least talk? And I did. Because quite honestly, I was really kind of exhausted with working in these small consultant firms. I mean, where you work all night and get a hamburger about 11:30, and maybe at 5 o'clock in the morning, you may go home for an hour or two and report back for 7 o'clock, or work all weekend. And I knew there were other guys that I talked to who worked in these corporations. At 5 o'clock, they'd reach over and pull that cord out of the wall and, fold it up, put it, and go home, and everything was over. The next morning, they'd come back, take the cord out, plug it in, and work. So that's the kind of job I wanted. I wanted. You could have vacations and all that. So anyway, try to make it short. There were a lot of tough times there, but. As fate would have it, I came in there under great duress and stayed over 30 years. And at the last few years that I was there, probably 10 years or so, I was the manager of the Industrial Design Group. So that's kind of a turnaround. It's not quite as dramatic as when Della's coming out of prison and becoming across. But, but it's kind of thing.
There are 3 people, Leroy and Andre and Vince, who started their own firms. I'd like to ask each of them to just say something about what it's been like to be on their own, and then we'll bring things to a conclusion.
But I just want to tell one little quick story here about my designing the Illinois exhibit for the New York World's Fair. And in doing that, I got the opportunity to work with Walt Disney. I sat in the legislature with him to defend the use of the Lincoln figure, which was a prototype for the Hall of Presidents. Everybody objected to using Lincoln. And Disney stood up and he said, word for word, during my lifetime, I have never designed anything in bad taste. This is merely an experiment, a 3-dimensional effort, and that's all it is, just an experiment. And so everybody applauded, and they allowed me to use the Lincoln figure as the theme of the Illinois exhibit. I thought I would like to mention that because years ago, I used to sit and dream about meeting Walt Disney, but I never thought that I would get that opportunity. And that was a great one. And one more little short thing. I heard people here mention Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright and I were sitting and talking. He said, you know what we ought to do? I said, no, what? He said, we should cement the whole thing over and start over all over again. So I just wanted to give you those 2 little examples. Okay. But as far as me starting in a business, it was quite a challenge, and I took on the challenge, and it went quite well. I mean, I would say that what happened is I recognized that there was nothing being done in the financial field, and I created 3-dimensional exhibits on LaSalle Street, and at one time did work for every bank and every savings and loan in this city at the same time with all different ideas. And in doing that, we became the most outstanding company in the United States doing financial displays. And so what I'm saying in essence is you sometimes have to recognize a need and then fulfill the need with whatever is necessary. And that's what I did. And now that's sort of obsolete because of branch banking, but it was quite a thing at one time. So that was the thing that accelerated my whole business.
Well, that actually makes a nice segue into Andre, who actually founded a firm in 1981 to meet a need as well.
Well, before I get into that, I have to tell Leroy I did the facade for the Illinois Pavilion that those figures went in. We did the building that you put the figures in.
Oh, that was okay. No. I wondered about that building.
Well, that's the curving wall. I know you had a problem with that, right? Plus the fact your figures didn't work all the time. Jefferson kept blinking when he was supposed to look straight ahead. Being an entrepreneur, if you want to use that, being foolish enough to take the plunge. And I should say we started at Skidmore as a summer student and ended up as an associate partner 27 years later. And the glass ceilings, if you want to call them that, you crash through them when you get ready. But the bruises that you get in breaking through those things and the reasons why leave a lot of scars. You know, breaking glass just cuts the hell out of you. Cuts your heart out in a way. Being a large corporation, as free as one might want to be, there's always a reason why there's going to be limitations, financially, professionally, or otherwise. And this has something to do with starting my own firm. Prior to me becoming an associate, I was a participant in the partnership. And the ladder up called for each one of the general partners to give you a vote of confidence. One black ball and you were out. Well, the day before elections came up, I was told that I was in. I had 16 out of 16 votes from the general partnership. The day that it was to be posted, I was called into Walter Netch's office, Myron Goldsmith, and there was a man by the name of Bruce Graham. He knows him very well. I was told that I was not going to be promoted because they needed someone to go to Washington, D.C. to work on the Pennsylvania project, and they couldn't send me. I don't have to tell you why they couldn't send me, but they weren't going to. So they sent someone else in my place. Well, that was the beginning. I went out and threw up. I walked down the Chicago River from the Inland Steel building, leaned over the railing, and just upchucked. Well, shortly after that, I was elected to the partnership, and on and on and on. Well, that had already left. That was the final glass blade that kind of gets you wherever you hurt, okay? You have 7 weeks of vacation you can't take. I take that back because I was never able to pull out a plug. I was living on airplanes, eating garbage for food, didn't see my family half the time because you were trying to do what you had to do, okay? So when I decided to leave the firm, the same man, I walked into his office, and I won't tell you all of the words, but it wound up like, you put your pants on every morning just like I do, and I make more money, right, in my division than all your fairies out there that you've got in your interior design department. That's part of the conversation, okay?
Oh boy.
Because remember one thing, creative or not, it's all about money. Don't ever forget that. It's all about money. I don't give a damn what color you are. If you bring home the bread, they're going to listen. Well, I walked out of the firm with 2 children in the university, a wife that did not work, a live-in maid, and 3 automobiles, okay? Well, I'll tell you, the children thought I'd lost my mind. My wife just looked at me in stark amazement, right? I had, at that time, no clients. I took a space and a responsibility for $100,000 on the rooftop of an old building for $7 a square foot and decided I was going to be in business. The one client I thought I had backed out, okay? The second one, Bennett and Conwell, a guy named Marshall Bennett, gave me a piece of paper and he said, if you can deliver this in one sheet, tell me how much you want, you've got the job. And that's how ARK was born, right? I never borrowed a dime from anybody, right? My children got put through school and all the rest of it, and it wasn't easy. You know, it's a whole lot of heartbreaks along the way. They're going to kill you. These guys out here, you know, Victor alluded to it a little while ago. We develop in different ways. I'm still working, although my daughter is now the president of our firm. I've retired basically from that and act as a consultant. I work for her. But we are involved in development, financing programs for projects for the city and private industry. We're presently looking into decent middle-income properties on the south side of Chicago. All right, now there's a lot of interest. The south side of Chicago is the hottest property in this city right now. And developers are coming in as fast as the sharks can get in the tank, I tell you, right? So if you guys want to really find out where it's at, you start looking at what's happening in the south side of the inner city, because it's coming back. And it's the imagination, it's a form of art. We do what we want. We're developing. Maybe I can answer this question. I guess I started in business out of sheer frustration, perhaps anger, differently than Brother Harris over here, or Leroy, or anybody else. Mine was just being angry with the way the system was manipulating me, right? Manipulating me. I was making money. I was a success for the firm. 27 years in a firm, and then they send somebody else to Washington, right? I earned that spot, and I didn't get it.
You're going to get the last word.
Well, I'm not going to keep you up. If I tried to tell you my story, it would take you at least a week sitting here going over the various things that we've been in to start an advertising firm in this environment. But all I can say is I'm very proud to be sitting here with these gentlemen, some of them who I've never met, some that I've heard of, and to say one thing, that Leroy, you know, my friend there, Winslow, sitting there in the middle, I'm so proud that he could make it here and talk with us. That's kind of the spirit that it took for most of us to get in business, to go sometimes when you didn't feel like it and you didn't know whether you're going to win, but I'm going to make it out anyway. So I would just say that it's been an effort for most of us in one way or another. But I think we can all say we made it, but we aren't finished, and let's keep on moving.